but are able to actually thrive. That's the America that we should all commit.
Good morning. My name is Brian Gilroy, and I am the CEO of Wildlife Partners here in Boerne, Texas. And for those of you that are not aware, currently we have this nightmare going on in the Senate where Hakeem Jeffries has been talking since 5 a.m. this morning. It's now almost noon, and this is all a delay tactic in the name of trying to prevent the passage of the big, beautiful bill. So I thought I would just take a minute to kind of share some insight and some information related to how this bill, which is expected to be made into law tomorrow on 4th of July, how that's going to affect the exotic wildlife industry. So I know there's been a lot of discussion here over the last, 4 or 5 months about what this bill is, if it's going to pass. And I realize most people are not all that informed about tax incentives and specifically how they relate to the exotic wildlife industry. So I always find these things to be very fascinating, but more importantly, they're critically important to our industry. And so if you've been in our industry, you've watched a number of things happening over the last couple of years as the result of kind of the byproduct of COVID and the sunset provisions related to the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And so specifically what I mean is that our economy ran into massive inflation, and that inflation devalued our money. There was massive amounts of money flowing into the economy, but the value of the dollar got less and less and less. And so what we've seen is the Federal Reserve has been increasing interest rates to levels that most people in kind of the millennial generation have never even heard of, much less seen. And what that's done is it's impacted borrowing. People are hesitant to go out and buy houses. They're not as readily available to go buy cars. People have just gotten into somewhat of a holding pattern due to these interest rates. But in addition to that, we've seen some sunset provisions that were built into the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And so businesses that were buying equipment as a result of that bill that Trump got put in place, they were able to expense 100% of the cost of those items, the business equipment that they were buying in the first year that they bought them. And that included exotic wildlife. And so while this provision of 100% was in place, all of us got to experience this incredible boom that went on in the market. Prices were going bananas. Supply was nowhere near what the demand was. We just saw this huge explosion in our industry. But since 2023, the deduction amount that we're eligible for, it went from 80% to 60%, and now in 2025, that number is 40%. So there's been kind of this perfect whirlwind in our industry where you've seen inflation, you've seen high interest rates, you've seen a reduction in the deductibility of the assets that we're buying. But the biggest uncertainty that we've been dealing with is the uncertainty of a presidential election. And so, as everybody knows, that's over. We've reached a solution. Donald Trump is the president. And now here we're listening to these people in Congress going back and forth about the bill that's been presented, which is a fulfillment of campaign promises. But within that bill, and it just so happens to be coming just in time, is this fulfillment of making the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act permanent. And why is that important? Well, it's critically important because what they're doing is they're taking us back to 100% depreciation on business equipment. And I use the term business equipment because that's what's in the tax code. But what I really mean is sable and kudu and bongo and springbok, because under the tax code, livestock is designated as business equipment. So what that means is that as of the 4th of July, assuming this idiot eventually shuts up, this bill is going to become law. And what that's going to do is, effective in January of 2025, any purchase that has been made related to business equipment, and more specifically exotic wildlife, those items are going to be 100% tax deductible this year. And that is going to be permanent moving forward. So as our industry is moving into the last half of 2025, we're able to do so with the mindset that every single purchase that we make, it is going to be subsidized by the IRS. if you are in the top tax bracket to the tune of 37.5%. So what does that mean? Well, it means if someone makes $1 million in a year, they owe tax on that, and the tax rate is going to come out to about 37.5%. I'm just using round numbers. So someone would owe $375,000 in tax. But with the passage of this bill, if they go out and they buy bongo or kudu or sable or any of the other animals that we raise, they spend $1 million on those animals, they no longer owe that tax. They have avoided having to pay that $375,000 in tax. But the beauty is that they're still holding on to an asset that's still worth $1 million. And that asset happens to be a tax favored asset because as it's having babies, as long as you hold those babies for a period of 12 months when you sell them, they're taxed at long-term capital gains rate, which is 15%. So what this bill is doing is it's putting us in a position where we're going back to 2017 terms. We're going back to the ability for business owners that are in a position where they've got income coming in from other sources. They can use exotic wildlife as a strategy to reduce that tax liability while still owning an asset that retains its value and simultaneously generates cash flow. There's another component of this that I think is critically important that's developed over the last couple of years, and it's the advent of insurance on our animals. When people are buying animals these days and they're buying kind of the elite breeders or specialized animals, they're taking advantage of the fact that we can buy mortality insurance on these animals. And that mortality insurance runs roughly 7% annually as a premium. So let's just say you buy $1 million of animals and you want to insure them. You're dealing with a 7% premium, so that's roughly $70,000 worth of a premium. But that premium is tax deductible. But in addition to that, if all of your animals die, they are insured. And being that you have an insured asset, what that enables you to do is it actually enables you to go to the bank. You could theoretically go to the bank and obtain a line of credit. You could borrow the $1 million in order to buy those animals. And because they're insured, the bank is ready to do that. They're much more willing to do so. And so with that said, if you made $1 million in your business, you buy $1 million worth of business equipment, you use leverage to do that. That leverage costs you $70,000 in insurance, plus the interest rate that's associated with it. But what you're doing is you're still holding on to the original $1 million that you made. And so with all of that being said, under this new bill, the big, beautiful bill, the government is creating a scenario where we have the opportunity to go out, buy exotic wildlife risk-free, while simultaneously retaining possession of the cash that we earn through our other businesses. And so I wanted to get on today and at least give you a little insight into the significance of why this bill is so important and what it's going to do for the rest of our economy. There's another factor that's in play right now. If you watch the news at all, one of the things that Trump has been doing is aggressively beating up on Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell is the chair of the Federal Reserve. And the reason he's beating up on him is because inflation is now at manageable rates, somewhere around 2 to 2.5%, which is the acceptable number. Despite that, Jerome Powell is not reducing rates. The Federal Reserve is keeping rates at their current level. Trump is adamant that this needs to change. He is hell-bent on making sure that interest rates come down to the point where he's calling for Jerome Powell's resignation and he's looking for an opportunity to remove him. What does that mean? Well, it means that we can expect here in the near future, over the next 3, 6, 9 months, to start seeing interest rates come down. So with all of that being said, there is somewhat of a perfect storm that's brewing, not just for our industry, but for all industry. When interest rates come down and tax strategies become more advantageous, and we're able to deduct 100% of business costs. But in addition to that, within this bill, all businesses that are pass-through entities are going to be able to take 20% of all of their income tax-free. So what that means is if you make $1 million, $200,000 of that income is tax-free. The $800,000 that's remaining, that is taxable. But if you're buying business equipment in order to offset that, you owe no tax while simultaneously you still own the equipment and it retains its value. So with all of that being said, this is an incredibly exciting time for our industry. It's an incredibly exciting time for our country, and I am super excited to see this bill becoming law on 4th of July, and I hope you are too. If you have any questions for us, please reach out. We're more than happy to share any insight that we have related to the bill. And if your tax counsel doesn't have a working knowledge of how these things work, doesn't have an understanding of how it is that this applies to the exotic wildlife industry, please feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to talk with them. We're more than happy to share the tax code with them and how it is that this applies to your ranching operation. The last thing is that here about a month ago, as a result of some lobbying done by the Exotic Wildlife Association, the state of Texas has exempted exotic wildlife from sales tax. And what that does is it creates an environment where all the purchases that we're making related to feed, fencing, buggies, animals, and anything else that we're doing, we are exempt from sales tax. That means that somewhere between 7 and 8%, we are no longer having to pay those sales tax percentages. So again, we're in this incredibly amazing time. Thank God the election is over. Thank God Trump got elected. We have all these things that are happening simultaneously. And I don't know if you're excited for the future, but I can tell you here at Wildlife Partners, we are extraordinarily enthused. We believe that there is incredible potential for our industry and many industries over the next 5 years. Thanks again for your time, and I hope you have a great day.